Hello and welcome to the Doctors Who podcast. Tonight, in our first non-Rand point of view, Nynaeve links up with Moraine and Lan after Shadar Logoth. Moraine reveals a truth to her that, try as she might, Nynaeve cannot refute. Join us after this. Hello and welcome to the Doctors Who podcast. My name is Chris.
I'm Chip.
And I'm Brian.
Guys, do you remember when we used to call ourselves the Doctors Who read stuff? And then we realized that you could have video podcasts, and now we're the Doctors Who podcast again?
Yeah. Maybe we should call ourselves that again.
It's all kind of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey.
It for sure is. Anyway, today we are covering Chapter 21 of Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time, Book 1. And if you do need a refresher on what happened, you can check the description of the video because we do have it typed up down there. But why don't we jump right in and talk about what we liked or didn't like? Chip, why don't you go?
Well, looking at this chapter, really, if you look at really everything that kind of built up prior to this, if this book was actually broken into parts, I think this would be the beginning of part 2. So with Shadar Logoth and the fleeing from Mashadar being the end of part 1. So now we've got all the groups split up, which allows Jordan to do some interesting things with his narrative construction. So now we're getting more points of view chapter other than Rand. So this one, we've got a Nynaeve point of view chapter. And I know we've got some parent chapters coming up. It's kind of fun to get to know some of the other characters a little bit more, and Nynaeve being one of the more interesting ones. It's kind of good insight into her character. We also get the first mention of the ways in this chapter, which I'm excited about because I guess I know where that's going at some point later down the road. But the other interesting thing that I kind of pulled out of this chapter was Nynaeve talking about how she encountered Trollocs as she fled from Shadar Logoth, but once they saw her, they basically turned around and went the other way. That she obviously wasn't who they were looking for. So anyway, other than that, it's kind of a fun Nynaeve chapter and get to know her a little bit better, and then to see the dynamics between her and Lan and Moraine.
Yeah, I think the big thing, I think Chip summed it up well, that this is sort of part 1 of part 2. So it's like the beginning portion of the second book. And I really, I can kind of feel like there's a little bit of a shift here. And I particularly was feeling like this was about time that we start to see more Nynaeve, Moraine interactions. Like it feels like they're kind of opposing views, but I think that's more just a matter of like miscommunication or misconceptions about the other. And I feel like they've been kind of butting heads for a while, and they actually needed this chapter to kind of like break some of that tension. So I thought that was a good character building chapter. It seemed like there was a lot of dynamics, and Lan the entire time is like, I'm staying out of this, just his reaction to it too, which again kind of reiterates, like, I identify most with Lan, and it's like, well, I'm just going to stand back and let the women fight or have their nice discussion, and I'll be on my way. So yeah, that was my thought.
From my perspective, Chip, I think you mentioned this maybe last episode or the episode before, that this is the first non-Rand point of view, and I actually stole that for the intro to the video. And it's also kind of that breaking of the party, right? So now we have people paired off. You've got Lan and Moraine and Nynaeve. You've got Rand and Matt and Tom. And so we're starting to see this group kind of go its separate ways. So that is a great opportunity for Jordan to put these characters in different situations, and they can have their own growth, their own arc, and their own development. There's also a lot of exposition here about how the true source or the one power works and first manifests itself. And there are some clues in here that if people haven't picked up on them yet, they will coming up. So yeah, this is a great, to echo Chip and then Brian, this is great from a part 2 perspective, because it's kind of like, we did this one thing with everybody, and now everybody's going their separate ways. So yeah. Okay, let's jump in. Brian, I think you mentioned the dynamic between Moraine and Nynaeve, right? Mm-hmm. And that, I think, was a cool choice on Jordan's part, because you do have that conflict, and I think the right conflict does make for some compelling exposition.
Well, and I think especially because you have 2 type A female characters in an otherwise female-driven book, it seems like if women kind of are the protagonists for a lot of the action, it's kind of only fitting that your 2 female leaders of this group are kind of butting heads. But it also was a good amount of exposition too, where we didn't realize that Nynaeve was maybe able to wield the one power. Like it actually was kind of an eye-opening thing where that might have been what they talked about in the inn, but we, the readers, don't really know that until now.
No, and Jordan dropped the hint, quite a few chapters ago when he mentioned, or when Moraine mentioned, that there were 2 channelers in the 2 rivers that she knew of, and Egwene being one of them. We didn't know at that time who the second one was, but I think when she shows up at the inn and she was able to track them down and follow them, that there's pretty good illusion that it's probably Nynaeve, but we still weren't sure really until now. I think Nynaeve's interesting too. That I don't know, either I don't know or I can't remember if I've read about her, what before she became the Wisdom, but it feels like she hasn't really had a lot of choices in the things that she's done. And now that she's outside of Emond's Field, even though she pretends like she doesn't want to go with them, I think she really does. That this is like an adventure for her, and she wants to go. And I think even though being told that you do have the ability to channel, she pushes back at first. But I think inside it's like, this is kind of cool. This is something new and different, and it's not that the choices are being thrust on me. I'm getting to make some decisions here. Because Moraine's basically like, yeah, you can go back home if you want. But they're all tied into the pattern at this point.
I like how, because this starts off and she's all by herself, and then she eventually comes across where Lan and Moraine are camped, and she's able to spy on them for a couple of minutes. And that's good, because all of the Lan-Moraine interaction up to this point has been in front of other people. You don't get to see... Mm-hmm. The unvarnished them until now, when they aren't aware that they're being watched. So that's kind of a cool insight. And then when Moraine suddenly realizes it, that she's near, and I think she says it later in the chapter, she's like, if I wasn't so tired, I would have known immediately, because if somebody who can wield the one power is nearby, other channelers can sense them. So...
sort of like force sense, right?
Yeah.
Seems like there's some similarities, at least between the force and the one power.
I think so. And then
I think so too.
As the scene kind of grows and develops, and Moraine's like, she drops the knowledge bomb. She's like, hey, you can channel. And then she's like, no, wait, I'm going to tell you how it happened. Some time ago, this thing happened, and you were able to, do something that you've always wanted, make something happen that you couldn't explain, kind of like Harry Potter, right? Like with the snake and the zoo, right? And,
yeah.
And afterwards, you got like fever and chills, and you were in bed for a couple hours because that first touching of the source made you sick, and this is the hint here that I alluded to. When you do it, you might act giddy, you might have this feeling of exhilaration, you might take foolish chances. And she's able to pinpoint the situations where Nynaeve has experience these things, and she's just like, oh crap, like inside you can tell she's like, oh shoot, but she's still like pushing back because you still have these two personalities that are very much dominant and want to be in control, and she's like, okay, fine. But getting there is fascinating.
That also sheds light on Rand's behavior, though, when they were in Barrelon with the White Cloaks, that he's dropping another hint that this is all about Nynaeve here, but it's also something else that someone else in the story experienced.
This isn't really spoilery, but let's go back to the group leaving the Two Rivers, and when they stop and Moraine's going around like rejuvenating the horses, and Bella doesn't need it. It's because Rand already did it when they were fleeing from the Drakkar, and that's when he was like mentally urging her on. So he, and then like that's probably where because before they met the White Cloaks in Barrelon, he was feeling a little under the weather, and that 7 to 10 days might have coincided with that first sickness, and then So putting those pieces together, and to be fair, Brian, I don't think that was super spoilery, but
no, just putting pieces together.
It's not something you would put together, I don't think, on your first read through, if you didn't have,
No, and this is only my second read through, and it's been a long time, but there's so many clues here that it's like, oh, he puts it right in front of you that, yep, this is what's going on.
So,
and I'm sure there's still stuff I'm missing even, on a second read through, but when you've read it like 10 times like Chris, then, Yeah.
But here's a pattern I'm seeing with Jordan's writing, is that
a pattern. I see what you did there.
Unintentional.
The threads of the pattern.
Well, he's placing these threads periodically through the story because the world he built is so rich and so developed, and there is so much to explain to the readers as you're going along, that he's sprinkling these bits of exposition here and there, and he's leaving clues and setting up things for later. And the way it's just all laid out, it's very, I'm saying, meticulous and premeditated how he's doing it. And it oftentimes, I think I say this, I said it for Mistborn, I said it for Name of the Wind, I said it for Dune, but it feels organic. It doesn't feel forced. So I like that. When an author can make it feel natural to reveal this information, and it's not just an info dump for 3 pages.
Yeah.
And then you also space out, like he's done here, where we just came from Shadar Logoth, and then we, had that excitement, and then it, takes a little bit to build it back up. It's not the Sanderlanche that we experienced before, where it's a lot of slow climb and then a big downhill. It's sort of, these little bunny hills of ups and downs.
Like an ebb and flow almost.
Exactly.
Yeah, and he does a lot of this stuff, like in these conversations or through Tom's stories. There's so much more there than I realized the first time through. That first time it's like, some of them drag, some of the dreams drag, but this time going through, it's like, oh, I see what he did there. I see where he's going here. So yeah, but it does feel pretty organic and just, it's all part of the bigger story.
I mean, and there is valid criticism out there for Jordan's writing. Just the meticulous detail, the way he focuses on certain behaviors, like Nynaeve tugging on her braid, or the women folding their arms below their breasts, or just this weird stuff that just keeps cropping up. That I think people are like, yeah, this happens consistently, and it's a little weird. But I mean.
Yeah, it's a little wool-headed.
Yeah, and the interactions between men and women, and how the men are oftentimes morons. But not saying the women are always on point, but I mean, there are valid criticisms, but criticisms aside, his ability to create this world, to have these characters navigating these paths, and as they get through these books, all 14 of them, these paths become intertwined and complicated, and they branch off, and they do all these crazy things, and he manages to tie it all in together at the end. Well, Brandon Sanderson came in and finished it at the end, but Jordan had everything planned out before his death.
But the framework was there from...
And this is a bit of a tangent, but I remember, I think it was an interview with Brandon Sanderson that I read where he said that before Robert Jordan died, he went and visited him, and... Oh, no, it was Harriet. It was Jordan's widow, where... Like, he and I think Robert Jordan's cousin were sitting around with Robert Jordan, and Jordan just, like, he told them how everything was going to wrap up and how everything was going to end. And it was just like him just being a gleeman, basically, for his wife and his cousin. And, oh, man, to have been a fly on the wall there would be really cool. So, yeah.
No, and that's impressive. They're impressive that he had the vision and forethought to kind of have this all plotted out the way that he did, as opposed to other. Because the other writing style that you hear about is like the garden or the tending a garden type, where you just kind of create these characters and let them go. And I'm talking about George R. R. Martin, but he has no idea where he's going, or he doesn't feel like it. Maybe he does, but it just doesn't feel like it with the way those stories have kind of come bloated. And I'll still read him if he ever writes the next book, but I like this one because I think from the beginning you felt like he knew where he was going with it.
I agree. All right. Anything else we want to hit on this, or have we hit the high points?
I think we hit most of the high points, but
I think so too.
I mean, there wasn't a lot of action or things happening in this chapter.
No.
It was mostly world building, exposition,
and getting people where they need to be for the next stage of this book. Yeah. Okay, so next time we have Perrin-centric chapters. We have 2 chapters to discuss. Those are chapters 22 and 23. So next week we will be back at you with those. In the meantime, please utilize our comments section below. Leave comments. Continue the discussion. What did you like? What didn't you like? If there was something we missed or something we misunderstood, we would love for you to let us know. As always, please hit that like button. Please hit that subscribe button. And you can use the bell notification so that when we release new content, you are aware. That was the beer saying hello. And until next time, thank you for listening. And...
Allons-y.